All right, everyone, we've got more evidence of the fact that we're in a moral panic right now. Somebody tweeted this at me, actually. Thank you for that. From the Calgary police up in Canada, actually. This has nothing to do with the United States. And it's worse here because, of course, there's more of a general strain of moralism within the United States. The fact that the moralists have gone from being primarily like the far right, like evangelicals especially, to being on the alt-left, that fact doesn't mean anything. There's still an ingrained vein of authoritarianism and moralism within the country that typically there's a little bit less of it in Canada, maybe like a place like Australia. It's most prevalent in Western Europe because those societies have been totalitarian for a long time. There was never really freedom in Western Europe for the most part, and hasn't been. It's always been legalistic. Here's the thing though. Calgary police come out. The little thing to tell parents about looking after little Jimmy, basically. And it looks like something straight out of the Satanic Panic, basically saying, oh, if your child is listening to like loud, angry music, they may be indoctrinated into white nationalism or something. Are you insane? Or are you living in the early 1980s? You see, this is exactly the same thing, literally. It could have been word for word. If you replaced white nationalism with communism, you could take this, put it in the 1950s, and it would be a period piece. It would make total sense in the context. If you replaced it with Satanism or devil worship, put it in the early mid-1980s, it would make total sense. What more need you know to know that we're in a moral panic? I'm seeing lamestream legacy media outlets now use that term. Belatedly, I wonder if some of these pundits are watching my channel sometimes. I'm scratching my head. Where did they get the idea that this could possibly be what's going on? We've been through it time and time before. It's not a new, there's nothing new under the sun when it comes to moral panic. It replicates itself over and over again. Every 3 decades or so, we get a new moral panic. It's just the way that things work. This time it happens to be secret army of white nationalists. Evil Hitler worshippers. They're everywhere. Little Jimmy's gonna listen to Screwdriver. Now, little Jimmy could be listening to 9 Inch Nails. You think that little Jimmy's parents probably know the difference? No, they're just gonna assume, oh, wow, this person said something that could be vaguely interpreted through 3 steps of separation as being white stuff, so it's automatically Nazi music. We gotta turn that off, start listening to classical. And the response will be the same. And here's the response. Having spoken with people who are actual white nationalists, a lot of them would prefer listening to Wagner as opposed to heavy metal or something. A lot of them find it to be degenerated. A lot of them don't even like rock music. Oh, well, that's evil. It's become multicultural swill. It's commercialized crap from Hollywood and the music industry, and we know who controls those. That's what they're gonna say. You're aiming your fire at the wrong group. No, people who have that kind of views are probably listening to classical music or something from the Victorian era. I don't think that there's much appreciation for modern rock among some of them. But then again, think of this. Richard Spencer comes out, says, well, my favorite band is Depeche Mode. So if nothing else, I can say he has good taste in music. It's my favorite band too. Are you gonna tell little Jimmy that he shouldn't be listening to Depeche Mode because he might become a Nazi or something like that? Are you gonna... The Soviet Union did that. Everyone wants to beat up on all of these good bands for some reason. I wonder why. Music is a quick way to make a social and political point. A quick way to go around censorship. Even on like YouTube. The same TOS for commentary is not entirely the same for music. You may have noticed this. You can look at grindcore that has all sorts of weird titles and lyrics, where there's an open expression of a desire to do criminal things, just shy of incitement. There's all sorts of warped, weird, almost evil stuff. There's black metal, same story. Oh yes, sacrifice for Satan, burn every village, we will burn heaven, we will burn the priest, we hang the nuns, stuff like that. But it's not censored at the same level because it's considered artistic. It's music. So art and music, typically during a moral panic, music is the first thing to get targeted. The fact that now music is being targeted is just more fucking evidence that we're in a fucking moral panic. We're being dragged there by a bunch of morons who don't know anything about culture, who have become outdated, who have outdated tastes and think that anything under the sun is edgy, it's too heavy, it's too loud or something. No, the peak loudness of music, unless you're talking about the fringe of metal, if you're talking about mainstream style rock and pop, as far as heaviness, you're looking at the 1990s, the 80s and the 90s with speed metal and stuff like that. You're talking Satan, new wave of British heavy metal and stuff like that. You're talking about Nine Inch Nails. You're talking about a Garbage or some of these bands. That was way heavier than the stuff that you're going to find on the modern rock station today for the most point. Oh, Little Jimmy might start reading Mein Kampf because he was listening to, Gary Newman or something. It's too weird. It's too out there. It's too male or something like that. Oh, he's listening to the Backstreet Boys. Well, there's some chauvinism for you. There's no girls in that band, are there? Is that what is that really what you believe? Look, in the 50s it was, oh, Elvis is swinging his hips around, and then, early 60s the Beatles and stuff like that. Oh, this is John Lennon said something unkind about religion. They smoked weed. They must be commies. Don't listen to this music, kids. Burn their albums. Okay. Fast forward to the 1980s. Oh, this band is satanic because, they're wearing King Diamond. He's wearing, like, makeup and stuff. So he must be a devil worshipper. Oh, Nicholas Schreck. Oh, the dude from Radio Werewolf. Yeah, oh, that's extremely satanic. He was actually a Satanist at the time. Not worshiping the devil Satanist, but you know what I mean. Iron Maiden. Oh, Jesus Christ. Ozzy Osbourne. Fuck. Black Sabbath? Oh no, we can't have that. Little Jimmy's gonna start, cutting cats' heads off or something. We gotta be moral, we've gotta be virtuous. We've gotta, it's never about moralism in the sense of preserving an actual cultural identity either. It's always about an assumed identity. So the nifty 50s Americana, just ignore all of the crimes that do exist. There are never crimes. Small town America, white picket fence. Look at our Formica tables that we just got. Praised Dwight Eisenhower. It's a myth. It never really existed. It's just a propagandist projection of what the culture was meant to be. For the average person, that was never reality. For the average person, that sort of iconography, basically, that you see depicted at the time, was never the reality for the average person. Meanwhile, the inner cities were already ghettos. They were already there. There were already problems there. There were already slums. There was widespread poverty in rural areas. But you never hear about that. You see the suburban sort of ideal of the middle class projected everywhere. That was just the way that it was. And it was pro-Jesus, and we're going to be moral and capitalistic, which we weren't under capitalism at the time already. It was half-assed. That's what we projected. And that's what the moralists of the era sought to support. And this dies off, late 1960s, basically, with Woodstock and the hippies and stuff like that. Anti-war rhetoric. War ended that moral panic. Because people realized, oh, well, yeah, our government's being just as butcherous as the communists are in many ways. Why don't we back off of this bullshit? And then they just got high. 70s go by. You don't have a lot of moral panic. You have a lot of religiosity at the time, almost a revivalism of fire and brimstone. But it's not the same moral panic in the same exact sense. 80s come around, all of a sudden speed metal comes into existence. Satan and all these other bands start existing. Ozzy goes solo and goes crazy because he's snorting coke. He's all literally coke bloated at the time, and starts wearing spandex instead of the trench coat he used to wear. And people go crazy about that too. Oh shit, Billy Idol. Oh no, Iron Butterfly, our arch enemy, and stuff like that. And you get the next moral panic. Only this time around, the projection of culture was more, it was the same small town America style of where moral culture that was being projected, but instead of worrying about communism, they didn't care at that time as much. Instead of that, it was more religiously based. This time around, it's progressive based. It's, oh, the United States must be progressive, and whatever the hell that means, and inclusive of every possible permutation of opinion that could exist, except those that we've marked for deletion, basically. And we're going to use AI this time around, that will help the situation make it any better. No. You're going to end up invoking the Streisand effect, so your censorship will never work. You make whatever you claim to be taboo and anti-cultural cool, which you're doing. You're actually promoting the spread of white nationalism. I hope you do understand that. and you're anti-liberty. You've abandoned everything the left used to proclaim that it believed in. Back during the evangelical days, we're talking, again, early, mid-90s. Back during those days, the left was like, oh, well, you know, separation of church and state, and they're not comfortable with this. Books should not be burned, they should be read. TV shows should not be censored. FCC, fuck them. You remember, what was the band's name? And this was Bush era. This was, I think, early 2000s. Was it Cheap Sex? Or one of these other bands? And they had a song called I've Been Raped by the FCC. You know, I've been raped by the FCC. Bush would take all my freedom from me. They want to control what I do and what I say. The Dixie Chicks get censored at the time. That was a huge issue. They're trying to censor everything. Radio and everything. Tipper Gore comes out. She's a Democrat. She's the wife of Al Gore. She was probably #1 on the list of enemies of freedom at the time. It wasn't just a bunch of Republicans. It was just people who were religious. Democrats in the 90s were a religious party too. There was no anti-religious sentiment within the Democratic Party unless you talked about a few really fringe individuals. But that was their moralism at the time. And now we've got it again. Calgary police, oh, this heavy music. Whoa. It's the same thing as before, but what was heavy in the 50s or the early 60s was different from what was heavy in the 80s. Now they're talking about like hate rock or something like that. They're talking about people who just go out of their way to offend people. Can you imagine if these people heard G.G. Allin? Can you imagine if they heard one of his albums? Oh my God. So evil, so despicable. We must erase this from human memory entirely. This might encourage people to, like, I don't know, eat their own poop or something like that. How despicable. We are so offended and triggered. Yeah, I'm sure that you are, because you're boring. You've gotten old enough to become what you used to fight against. It's just like the old hippies. 90% of them become a bunch of fucking yuppies in the 1980s. Oh, this is swell. Cocaine is so much better than LSD ever was. I want to go to Miami and become a businessman. I want to manage some cubicles. Heh, isn't it swell? That's exactly what it was about. It was the same fucking generation. They were edgy, and then they got nervous because things got a little too edgy for them as they get older, and then they say, oh, you must censor everything under the sun. And then the next generation comes along. Gen X really is responsible for the current moral panic almost more than the millennials are. This time they get some youth backup. But you got to remember something. That happened before too. Did you know that the Vietnam War was more popular among the youth than it was among people who were older at the time? Did you know that? Most people don't. It actually was. It's just that there was a very vocal subsection of the youth that fought against it. They were the ones that got the attention because they were the ones doing all the drugs. They were the ones having orgies in the street, going to Woodstock and stuff like that. And then for every young hippie, you had some old wizardly dude handing out mushrooms at Woodstock. A lot of people don't seem to understand this. It's not all about youth. Yeah, the millennials, my generation, are screwed up in the head, some of them, because they were raised on authoritarian propaganda. See, the same sort of folks that 10 years ago would stand alongside me and say, well, no more war, and evangelism is being abusive, we need to cut that out, freedom is good, no world policing, the surveillance is evil. Now all of a sudden they're in favor of all this shit. They've gone the way of they've become boring like the hippies when they became yuppies. Literally 10 years later, about the same span of time. How wonderful! Now I get to be an outcast in my own generation, by the way. You know, not that I wasn't kind of before, because I was listening to like 70s and 80s music, and they're all like, "Oh, have you heard of this wonderful new band? It's called NSYNC, or Britney Spears is so great." Fuck that. You know, that was never edgy to begin with. That was always tame. Yeah, when Britney Spears is talking about virginity and stuff, yeah, I'm sure I'm taken in by this. The Calgary police, yeah, Canada, the repository of authoritarians. See, the problem is the same left that was out before, and so couldn't exact authoritarianism on any meaningful level, all of a sudden finds itself in charge in some of these countries. Thank goodness we have Trump in as a president, because he represents the anti-authoritarian forces in the United States right now. Sad as though that may seem, Trump's not the authoritarian. Trump's the libertarian of them, if you want to, you know, compare the two dichotomous opposites, so-called, within the political culture. Of course, got to side with libertarianism in the sense of the libertarian movement as a whole, at least for myself. Trump's not the authoritarian. The Democrats are the ones that want to censor everything. They are. Some of the Republicans join them. We got to do something about this. These evil white supremacists. See, all 10 of them. I'm sure. Little Jimmy, every angry band he listens to must be Nazis. What about anarcho-punk? What if he's listening to Leftover Crack or something like that? And he's actually being indoctrinated by the, like, Antifa members or something. You don't seem worried about this for some odd reason. I wonder why that could possibly be. Because you see them as useful idiots, as pawns to cause violence and to enforce your authoritarian agenda by making more problems. Government has to make problems, people. Has to make problems to justify its ever-increasing budget, its ever-increasing abusive scope, and each moral panic is more abusive than in the past. Each one's worse. When the Red Scare comes along, some people got their lives ruined by that. But for most people, it was an inconvenience. It was more, oh, I've been shunned by my community, kind of, so I had to work in the next town over because they think I'm a commie, you know, because I'm actually like a liberal or something. And they're screwed up, or it was like anti-gay rhetoric or something at the time. And that was more of a problem. That's still like the electroshock era. Satanic panic comes along. Some people got thrown in jail for child abuse that never actually happened at the time. Most of them were exonerated fairly quickly because there's never any evidence. There was a couple that was just released this year. They'd been in jail since the 1980s. There was not one fucking shred of evidence they had done anything wrong. But oh, they're Satanists. They weren't Satanists. They didn't even have anything to do with the milquetoast, lackluster, extremely mild Church of Satan, let alone some underground satanic order that's abducting people. There was no evidence, and yet somehow magically the justice system totally let him fall through the cracks at the time. This time around, you see people who say one vague thing that couldn't even reasonably be construed as having anything to do with Nazism or anything like that. They get kicked out of their college, they get fired from their job, they get beaten in the streets, they get censored on every online platform that ever existed. What more could possibly happen beyond executing these people for their beliefs? Do we want to? Is the alt-left going to suggest bringing back the guillotine for all 10 people in the country who actually have out there and violent beliefs? Or is it going to go further, overstretch, and collapse its own moral panic? Well, it's always what's happened before. You know, you try to warn these people that they're doing something dumb. They won't listen. They don't want to listen to me because, in the words of some of them, I'm a fucking white male, so it doesn't really matter what I say. You know, I'm not in a gay relationship and I'm not transgendered, so they couldn't care less what I have to say. That's ultimately what it's about. And it's dumb. It's so moronic when they do this. You're going after music like they do in every moral panic. Music, you know, usually comes first. They identify the core problem, which is some ideology they want to fight. Pretty soon they go after the music. And then after the music, now that they're going after that, they'll keep doing that for a while. They'll go after video games, they'll go after art, they'll go after the internet some more, of course. And that's sort of what they'll do. They'll try to silence people. Those people will get stronger under that suppression, and then they will break the paradigm. They will break the moral panic that we're under. By the way, I wonder where these lamestream legacy media outlets got it in their heads that there was a moral panic. You might have seen some headlines using that term. Where do you think they got that from? You think that these pundits, their staffers, don't pay attention to the online world where all the actual talent is, so they can dig for material to actually ramble about? So they can get their teleprompter-fed ideas up in their heads? So that they're idiot pundits that don't even know how to speak for 5 seconds, let alone 5 minutes, unaided by a script or at least notes? Where do you think they get all these terms for? I mean, from. Where do you think? That's the internet. Yeah, they frequent YouTube. They frequent Twitter, stuff like that. Gives them hot stories. Sometimes it's the people themselves, sometimes it's their staff. Some of these people have dozens of people working for them. They read what you read. It's like when people say, oh, but Styx, sometimes you include archived links to the legacy media in your videos. Yeah, well, number one, I do that because otherwise people are going to ramble at me. Where's the source? Where's the source for this? And you try to give them like an independent media article or a YouTube video. That's not a real source because it doesn't have journalistic integrity or something like that. So I just said screw it and I just archive them and I give them what they want. because they're still indoctrinated. Oh well, not my problem, but I'll do you a solid there so you'll stop whining in my comment section. Likewise, they say at the same time, oh, but that means that you get your news from the legacy media. Well, no, not really. No, the legacy media is getting some of its, especially internet-based news, from people like me. That's where they're getting it. Where do you think they think these terms up, these ideas on their own? They're not intelligent enough to do that. No, they're getting it from some podcasts. They're getting it from some YouTuber, someone's Twitter handle. That's where they get these buzz terms once they start throwing them out. Do you wonder? Term alt-left gets used by Trump. Where do you think he heard that? Do you think he made that up himself, or do you think it came from the online world where it originated? Now, Sargon was using it, and others were using it like on 4chan for months. Where do you think they got it? Some staffer injected that into Trump's mind after seeing it online. That's what happens. That's the glory of the alt media. We can actually inject... linguistics is a wonderful thing. You can totally screw with people's perception of reality. You can do this for benevolent reasons. You can try to move culture in a less abusive and generally better direction if you know what you're doing. You know, where do you think they thought that we were in a moral panic? They just thought it up themselves, despite the fact that they would really want to keep that hidden because they don't want people to realize how dumb it all is. Because they want a moral panic. It gives them more clickbait opportunities. They don't want to reveal that fact to people. They were compelled to. How do you think they were compelled to? It's because the alt media started using that term. So that means they're like, well, we'll make do with a bad situation, which is people know how full of shit we are now. We'll clickbait the same title. That way, hopefully, anybody searching for moral panic is seeing the lamestream, very controlled, very dry and lackluster shit media, as opposed to the much more honest alt media. Simple tactic. Of course, they'll fail, but that's what they're trying, essentially. Yeah. So we're in a moral panic. Get over it. It's definitely true at this point. That's about all. Peace out.